Hello. Today, we're delighted to have our guest, who is an agent, the director head of Chris Tomasino Agency, and is Chris Tomasino. Welcome, Chris.
Hi there. How are you?
Good, good. We're doing great. I was just saying to you earlier, being an agent, it's like one of those mysterious things. I think that's where the word secret agent comes from, because nobody really knows what they do. Could you tell us a little bit about what an agent does?
The agent's the middleman between an author and the publisher, primarily the publisher, but not just the publisher, because we have to kind of, we're the nannies of the book. We take care of the book from the minute it's basically presented to us as an idea all the way through its life as a book. And I'm agenting books still that I sold in the 70s, 1970s.
Wow.
Because if they're still in print and there's still things going on with them, you have to keep tracking it. So it's a long relationship. So I always say, if you better love the books you're working on, because they're going to be around like your children for a really long time.
Okay.
But
Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, but I think it's a business relationship, but it's also, for me, an editorial one. So I do editorial work on the material that comes to me, but I also am the interface relating to the business of selling the book and having the book out in the world.
Okay. Imagine I'm a young, author, say a novelist, and I got my first novel. What would happen? How would I get to you, and how would you assess that introduction?
I personally get clients from other clients, but I also get clients from people like you who are publishers or writers who know of me and think that my particular expertise as an agent might fit with somebody's book that they're trying to get sold. But the other thing is, if somebody who's written anything, whether it's a novel or nonfiction, if they can go on to a website of different agencies and they see the kinds of books that those agencies are selling, then it makes sense for you to go to certain agents that are in the genres that you're writing in. If you're a mystery writer, you may want to see that the agent you want to work with has done a lot of mysteries. Or you may have the opposite reaction, which is, I don't want to be herded in with all those mystery writers. I want somebody who will see me as their special mystery writer, and I'll be the only one on their list. So you have to be a little strategic in the way you think about who might represent you. But I always feel good when I get a submission letter from a writer that says, I'm aware that you represent so-and-so or this book, and it feels to me like this is the kind of work that you like, and this is what I'm doing, and this is how it compares. So that I feel like the person's done their homework and try to match my agency with their work.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting in a sense, taking on this persona of being, a young, unknown, writer. What I'm realizing from what you say is that getting to you is not step one, it's step two. Step one is doing the homework, as you say, either knowing a client of yours, approaching, doing the work online, or in some way separating themselves from the mass of solicitations, that you receive, which I know as a publisher, I have the same feeling. If somebody writes to me and says, I like the work of H.L. Hicks, I've loved, William Hayen, and therefore that's much more important to me than if they say, I've written this novel and they tell me about the novel. I mean, I first want to know why they're coming to me, and I think that's what you're saying also.
And also, it makes you feel that you're not part of this huge submission list that could have hundreds of names on it.
Right. Yeah, back in the day, the post office used to keep things in check because journals would only accept original sheets, and you had to tape. So that kept the level of submissions down.
Some
But
of them still do
now,
that, you know. Some of the journals still do that.
it's not a bad plan. Of course, they're going to get submissions from everybody over 70, but that's that demographic needs to be served too. Uh, but you mentioned earlier, I think this is really important, that you're kind of the nanny or caretaker of the book, and that you do editorial work. So how does that work, Chris? You imagine now you've accepted a book. What would happen then?
Well, actually, it's possible that I won't accept it until I understand
Okay.
that the person can do the editorial work that I think might be needed on the project before I decide whether or not I will accept the work. And so
Okay.
it's a very chicken and egg thing, because I don't necessarily want to spend lots and lots of time, because I'm not being paid for my time,
Right.
with something. But I do often have ideas about changes that would work, or ways to approach the material that might be different from what's on the page at the moment. And those are the things that I'm very interested in seeing if the person can do. If that person can do that, then I'm much more interested in taking them seriously and taking them on as a client. So sometimes what happens is, for example, if somebody will send me a partial manuscript, which, because I don't start with looking at the whole thing, I'll look at, anywhere from 25 to 30, 50 pages. If they've already written something. A lot of times I will do an editorial, I'll give editorial guidance on those pages. And if then the material comes back to me and and the next set of pages reflect the work that I did on the first set of pages, then I feel more confident. You see, when you get, as an agent, I get hundreds of submissions a month. And so there are the ones that are really bad and there are the ones that are really good. And the really bad is a big number. The really good is an infinitesimal number. But then there's this middle ground. And those are the problem, because then it's like, how many hours are there in a day? How many people can I take on? How likely is it that this particular piece is going to be the one that I think is going to make it through? And also, if it's a new writer, is the trigger for a career? Because I don't want a one-off. I don't want one book by one person. I'd rather know that this person's going to build a career. And so, there's a lot of navigation when you first look at something from someone. So if the book it needs help, it needs some work, it needs some new ideas, then you have a conversation with the person. It's to do with chemistry too, as much as anything. And then it also has to do with, whether or not they can follow through on the page and see if some of the ideas, or if you see it the same way. Because a lot of times I'll say, I think this should be, it's this character that's the important character, not that character, or whatever. And if the person says, that's nuts, this is not what I want, then I'll say, go and be well,
Yes.
But it's not for me.
Right.
And I'm not right 100% of the time. So, I think you've got to be steadfast about what you're doing as a writer, but also be open to some other ideas from people who might be out there in the world. If you want to do commercial work, I think you do need to listen to what experts who've been in the field for a while have to say. You don't have to take everybody's advice, but you do have to listen.
Right. It's so interesting. Another thing I think people don't realize oftentimes, our image of a writer, is someone who's got their head in the clouds, living in a garret. They're in another world, and yet the reality is that temperament is so important. You're talking about chemistry, talking about the ability of a writer to integrate their vision with other editorial visions. All of that stuff takes real world sensibility.
Right.
And I'm wondering, of course you're looking at the book, but you're also looking at the person, aren't you?
Yes, for sure. And whether or not I think that that's a person that I can be in a business relationship with for a long period of time.
Right.
Somebody who I think has is undefensive, somebody who has a realistic view of where they are in the firmament of writers at that point in time, and if I like them, you know, because if I don't like the person, I'm not gonna work with the person. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I mean, don't forget, an agent doesn't make a dime until he or she sells a book. So there's a lot of time that's involved prior to that moment when you get an advance check in the mail, you know, or sent to your account. So I work on percentages. I work at, you know, 15% of anything that's in the US and North America, basically, in English. And then if there are foreign rights and different other rights that we sell, it's 20%, but it just depends on the deal. But for the most part, you know, I don't get paid until I actually sell this thing. So I can't take on things that I think are really, really long shots unless it's a passion project for me. And because otherwise I couldn't make a living. So that's why for me, I pick very carefully the people with whom I'm involved, because I don't want to have a whole stack of things that I like a lot, but I can't sell.
Right.
Because that's just free time. You know, I'm just giving away my time there.
Right. Yeah, I always say the same thing too. Is like I think a lot of times writers who have been students expect, you know, there's a kind of a transference. You expect everybody to read the way your professor read, which was with care and all the way to the end. And, you know, as an editor or as an agent, you know, that's, you know, I tell people, I say, you know, we have a 1% to 2% acceptance rate, but if I read your whole book, that's probably a 50% acceptance rate, you know, I mean, and I hate it when I've read a whole book and then say no, because I just wasted a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sure that's you know, that's the experience, is you become intuitive and a little bit ruthless, I think, because for time constraints.
Right. Right.
You know, how did you get into the business, Chris? How did you become an agent?
Sort of backwards. I was working at an educational film company, and I was writing teachers' guides and scripts for educational films. And I was working with a couple who were doing a set of films for that company, and they wanted to expand what their work was, and they decided that maybe I could be their PA, their production assistant. They rented space from a man who had an agency. And so when I came in, they hired me and he hired me, and they were sharing me. And so he was doing some book work and doing television, news and sports work, representing, you know, commentators and producer directors for news and sports on television. And they were doing their kids' films, educational films. And so I was working for everybody. And as time went on, I got involved with the book business more because that was what appealed to me. So I ended up shedding some of the other work and then taking over the book business in that company. And so that's how it got started. And it was really great because I've been a reader since I was a little girl, and just, you know, I couldn't believe I could make money from actually reading. So, you know, this was like manna from heaven. So, you know, and I have to say, I never regretted it. I was a psych major in college, and it's held me in very good stead, because if I'd been an English major, I don't think it would have been as useful
Right.
as using my ability to sort of psych out where people are when they're writing. Writing is a very lonely profession. or activity. You're by yourself while you're doing this, and you're generally not showing your work to anybody else or to many other people. And so there's a lot of psychology to being able to talk to a writer about their work and to explain to them not just about what's on the page and not just about the writing, but also about the realities of book business. And so I found that being a psych major was the best thing that could have happened, because it helped me to figure out how to deal with personalities. And, you know, writers have so many different kinds of personalities and issues that, you know, it's really useful.
Right. I love that idea that you identify first as a reader, and that activity, that's the kind of central thing behind being an agent,
Yeah.
which is great, because that's obviously what you do, and you can't believe, that's always the job you want, is the job to say, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this.
Yeah.
So at some point you branched out and started your own agency, and what was the catalyst for that?
Well, I had been with an agency for a long time, for many years, that I was the main book person. And I guess I was, you know, I had a small child, and I think I was at a point in my life where I thought, I don't really want to work for another person. I don't want to be dependent on somebody else. And there was no promise about what would happen if it was a sole owner company, and if something happened to him, you know, I don't know where I would have been. So I thought it's better for me to sort of build my own agency now. I really knew what I was doing, and I was pretty much a lone wolf there too, because the agency was much more involved with sports and news television, and I was the primary person. I was bringing in a lot of the money in the company, but I was the only person doing what I did. And so I wasn't getting all that much support anyway. So I think it was the time for me to just say, okay, I shouldn't have to share all this with people who don't seem to have this as a priority anymore. So that's why I left. And it was hard, because I'd been there many years, and the people there were my friends, you know, but it was a good time for me to leave. And it worked out well, because then I could really make all the decisions. I mean, when you work for another company, a lot of times the people that are your bosses will tell you who they think you should represent. And a lot of times it may not be your priority. So I wanted to make all the choices, and that was good. I mean, I ended up often being told that I had to try and sell a book by a newscaster in Omaha that I knew I wouldn't be able to sell, you know.
Oh,
So I was really better off just picking and choosing my own stuff and going in my own direction. And I had started to develop some specialties at that point, which change all the time, because as an agent, you know, you sort of have to ride the waves. So if, you know, maybe at one point, new age kinds of books were a big deal, and then those sort of went into behind the scenes a little bit more, and something else would come up front. So you have to really be able to see what the trends are, and be able to go with them as much as you're comfortable with, you know. And I wanted the freedom to do that too. So
right. And so it's interesting, because it's not really a brick and mortar kind of move. I mean, you're just your clients would have stayed with you, right? I mean, when you leave, your clients are still your clients. Is that the way it works?
I had about over 100 clients when I left, and I took 6 with me.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's all I could negotiate to take with me.
Interesting. So you were really just starting out.
Yes.
With.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then there were, and the ones that I took with me, I shared partially in their back income from when the deals I had done for them before I left. But then, and I was then, for a certain period of time, I shared future income with my old boss. And then that drifted away. And so then I was on my own with them, you know, so it depended.
Right. And so, interestingly enough, I mean, you begin as a reader, but it certainly sounds like you have to acquire quite a lot of business facility over the years. I mean, in terms of making business kind of judgments
Yeah.
and all of that. How did that happen for you? Here you're a psych major, who's a reader. I didn't see an MBA on that resume.
Yeah, well, the main thing was contracts,
Okay.
is reading contracts, because once you read a lot of contracts, you start to see what's custom and practice. You know,
I
what
see.
are the things that are normal that belong in a contract, and what are advantageous to an author. And so I think that's where my skill set lies too. I'm very good at that. I'm very good at looking at contracts and saying, okay, this is really good for my client. This is really not good for my client.
Okay.
And then trying to figure out a common ground for everybody. I mean, it's why you should have an agent, because a writer, you do not want to negotiate your contract with a publisher directly,
Right.
because you want to do the business of the book, of writing the book and getting the book right. You
Right.
don't want to mess with the business stuff and have that bleeding into it.
Right.
Let somebody else do that for you. And
Sure.
that way I can fight the fight, you know. But we can leave the editorial relationship kind of pure, which I believe in. I really believe that that's the right way to do it. Not just because I'm an agent. If I weren't one, I'd still feel that way. But I do think that for me, learning how to look at a contract and know and be an advocate for my client was important. And that was just by practice, reading and reading lots and lots of contracts and understanding them, and not getting nervous about legalese in a contract, and just sort of thinking it through in a more commonsensical way. And that's how I learned how to do that part of it.
Interesting. Wow. You've talked about the relationship with the writer, and what about the relationship with the publishers? I mean, that, when you're negotiating with them, how does that work? You have a book now, and how do you decide how to approach the various possible publishers?
When I have a book, I think very hard right away about which publishers are the right ones for that genre of book. Who I know likes that kind of work, does that kind of work, has a list that supports that kind of work. So I make a list right away of who I think, which houses are the right houses, and which editors that I know at the houses are the people who are looking for books like that. So the first thing is your contacts, who you know, who you think is right for something. And I make a big list, and that's a multiple submission list. So usually I send out to many places at once. And I make sure they all know that, because I don't want anybody to think they have an exclusive on something that they don't have. And then you start getting responses from people. And sometimes they're just rejections. Rejections usually come quick. And then you get comments, and people call you and they ask you questions, and then as time wears on, you start to get some positive reviews, and what people say is like, I'm going to have other people here look at this. And eventually, if you're lucky, you end up getting multiple offers, or people who want to make offers. And sometimes you have to balance those against each other. And sometimes you do that in the form of an auction, or sometimes you just discuss it with people and you figure out, if your client maybe has a preference for one house over another, or one editor over another. And sometimes you'll bring your clients in to meet with people. So a lot of it has to do with whom you trust in the industry, which houses you feel are right. And that relationship is important before you get to the actual offer. Then you get the offer. And at that point, you figure out which one is the best for your client. It's not always the most upfront money. Sometimes there are other things involved, promotion, or other things that people will say, well, I want to do. Recently, not that long ago, I had a book that a number of publishers wanted to do, and I was proposing it as an adult nonfiction book. And one house said, we want to do that, but we also want to do a kid's book based on it. And that was just out of the blue. I mean, we didn't even consider that. But when we went back and we looked at everybody's offers or everybody's interest and how that played out, we said, you know, this is a great book to be done for kids too. So that took more, that gave us more leverage. They got more leverage because of that. And so I think that that was a very interesting, you know, sometimes you're comparing apples to apples, but a lot of times you're not.
Wow.
And so you have to figure out what the balance is. So then you make the decision, you pick the house, and then they, you know, they give you the offer, you negotiate the offer, and you then do the contract. And the contract is always, you know, kind of, you know, a pissing match, to be honest. I mean, it's like, it's you know, everybody's going to give and take. That's the way it's got to be. And then you finally get through that. And then from that point on, you know, you're kind of turning the book over to the editorial people to be working on it. But I'm always in the loop on that because I'm very interested in what is going on editorially, because that has to do again with chemistry. How is the chemistry between the publisher or the editor and the writer? And is that working? Because if it's not working, then I got to insert myself in that situation and try and figure out how to help it along.
Right.
So, you know, you're always there. And then when the production starts and when they're designing the book and when they're talking about covers and when they're talking about other things to do, audio or whatever else is going on, you know, there's got to be a lot of decisions made along the way. And so I'm there for all of that as well. And it goes right up to when they finally publish the book. And then from there, and eventually when income is coming in on the book, that income comes to me.
Oh.
I take my 15%, and then I send the rest of the money to the client.
I see.
So the process goes on, and it goes on and on and on for years in some cases.
Right.
In most cases, actually, for years.
Wow.
So you have to really know that it's a project that everybody is feeling good about being in each other's life for a long time. Because that's the way, I mean, you know that from the work you do. And also, I feel strongly that if at all possible, if everybody likes each other and it's working well, you want to keep a writer's work in one place if you can, because you want a body of work to be to give some ballast and some heft to that person's place in a writer's world, you know? And I think that every publisher, if they know that you're scattered all over town, they're not that interested, you know, they'd rather have your body of work. Right. And so I think that's important too. And I think that carries a lot of weight if you can stay with publishers, you know, if they're doing well for you, you know, then loyalty is important from them and from you as a writer.
It's a very personal kind of business. Even though it's a business, it seems to be really, you know, kind of cross the lines and for psychology and commerce and literary work. And of course, you do a whole lot of, I mean, you have a very eclectic list. And you mentioned earlier riding the wave, and I'm curious about that. You've witnessed, as we've all, you know, witnessed the huge changes in publishing. What do you see as the changes that have most affected you, and how do you feel about them?
Well, I think that in a way, the biggest changes that I've seen that are affecting us have less to do with what genres are popular than to do with the shrinking of the marketplace, where a lot of the smaller publishing houses were bought up and were combined and consolidated under a few big tent publishers. And when that happens, they have more power than they should probably. And so it's harder to negotiate with them because they have an awful lot of power. And then Amazon came into the picture, and Amazon also controls a lot in terms of discounting and the amount of money that they will share with a publisher when they're distributing books for a publisher. So there's, for me, the business side of it has been very impactful. The shrinking of small businesses and the prevalence of large corporations has really changed things. But as far as the genres are concerned, you know, I actually think that it's fun to see things change. You know, I like the fact that vampires were big for a while. You know, I like, I just, you know, it keeps me from being bored. It keeps the writers, it brings different kinds of writers to the market, you know, because if you were into vampires, and now all of a sudden there's, you know, interest in vampires, then, you know, this is great for you. But, you know, don't be surprised if vampires lose, you know,
Their bite.
Yeah, lose their bite. And then, you know, other people will be favored, you know.
Right.
I just think it's interesting. And I find that in foreign too. Recently, somebody was saying that mind body stuff is getting more popular in France, which it wasn't for years. And now all of a sudden, and I had tons of that, and then couldn't sell it in France. And now maybe I can, you know. So things change, things evolve, and it gives you more opportunity to do things maybe you couldn't do before, which, I mean, I did a lot of kids teen stuff in the 80s and 90s. I did a ton of teen stuff. And then it sort of slid away and it was gone for a while, and now it's picked up again. I mean, it's just funny. I mean, I think that nothing's new and nothing's old. I mean, it all just rotates, you know. But I would say that for me, you know, the other thing that's important was that the change from typewriters, like you said, to computers, because people thought that if they sent a manuscript that looked great physically, that it was great. And you'd find these, like, people didn't know how to edit. They would just like send you pages and pages and pages of stuff because they could, because it went so fast, you know, and then they would forget to cut things and it would be just this mess. And so I think that a lot of times now it's very easy to write, physically easy, and people are not editing themselves as well. I think that it is quite easy technically to edit yourself on a computer, but people tend to just not do it as much. And so they're kind of loving hearing themselves talk a lot more. And so, and it's all on the page, you know.
Right.
So one thing I would say is, you know, when you send things to anybody, put it away first for like a month, go back, read it again, and make sure it's as tight as you want it to be. Because sometimes it's just too much fun to just write away, you know.
Right.
And your first moment, I mean, the first 10 pages are going to get me or not, you know. So that's important.
Well, one of the exercises that the students do is we actually have the first 100 words. You know, and I say, now look, you've been staring at these words, you know, for quite a while, right? I mean, so they're perfect. And then we look at them and we actually take them off the page. I say, I don't even want you to read them. I just want you to say them. And I'm not interested in getting it right. I'm not interested in memorizing it. I just want to hear your voice to see if you've got this voice. And they do it, and it's so much fun. And a lot of times they wind up having pretty radical changes in those 100 words. And I'm thinking, if you're changing,
I love that you have them read it out loud.
Yeah, they just,
I love
you know,
that, because that will give you a rhythm.
Right.
That will tell you if something's awkward. I think that's brilliant. I mean, really good.
But the irony of it is that, you know, it's a shift. The realization, the shift that they, I think, have to see, as you mentioned earlier, you know, writers are alone, and or they show their writers to show their work to people who are going to be supportive, and you or I might be the first person as a publisher or agent who would see it, who's not necessarily going to be supportive. We represent this public thing,
Yeah.
And we really don't have any allegiance
Right.
until you earn the allegiance. And so the first 10 pages, the first 100 words, we just don't have time to go beyond that.
Right.
And I think that's a hard transformation, as you point out. It's partly a technological thing that people just, it's easy to write. I know for myself, in the old days, if something was going wrong, I had another draft I could go back and look at. But now I'm too lazy and I just erase, and so I don't have the old drafts. And that's, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced the realization, this is the only thing I have. I don't have a first draft or
The
second
other
draft.
thing too is when you edit too much, sometimes you lose something. You know,
Interesting.
when you chop it up, when you're constantly re-chopping, then it loses.
You're frozen here. Oh, okay. I'm going to pause now.
I think
Okay.
sometimes people over edit. There's that fine line that you need to walk between overthinking something and underthinking something. And lots of times if you edit over and over and over and over, it becomes chopped up and it doesn't have the flow that you want it to have. It loses some of the juice that it had when you just put it down on the page instinctively.
Right.
So it's a hard thing to know when you've done too much work on something or when you haven't done enough work on something.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
I think you learn by instinct, and after a lot of practice,
Right.
when it feels right,
Right. In fact, reminds me of Jack Nicklaus, the golfer, who, somebody made a shot and somebody said, "That's a lucky shot." And Jack says, yeah, it's amazing. The more I practice, the luckier I get, And I think that's kind of where it is, that sense of you're practicing, but you're not frozen in that practice. And it's mysterious. It's what we call the muse, and so it's hard to do. Chris Tomasino, thank you so much. You're up in Maine, and I'm glad that you're safe up there. And it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. And I look forward to seeing you again in January, at least virtually, on the panel.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for all your great work. Much appreciated.
I enjoy it. I'm glad to be doing what I do. And I'm glad to have colleagues like you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.